I'm always looking for more opportunities to talk about the world's most populous country on this show. And we don't talk about India and its 1.4 billion people nearly enough. And this week, Keir Starmer has given us an excuse. The British Prime Minister has been in Mumbai with industry leaders on a trade delegation.
Deal done, but now he's gleefully coming back for more. And the feeling is mutual. Hundreds of billboards lining the highway to Mumbai to welcome Sir Keir Starmer and his delegation of around 130 chief executives, business leaders and university vice-chancellors.
By the time I walk around on the plane on the way home, I want each of you to tell me what you've got out of this trip, a deal, a contact, or something else.
Keir Starmer only ever looks happy when he's abroad on a nice junket trip. That was how the UK's Channel 4 reported the trip of Starmer to India. The Indian media appear to have also welcomed the visit. A popular pro-Modi channel used Starmer's visit as an opportunity to bash the opposition leader, Rahul Gandhi.
This very day, it is important to remind the ones who called India a dead economy. Remember just 3 months ago, on 31st of July, leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha, Rahul Gandhi, while addressing the lower house of the parliament, insulted India's economy openly. Echoing US President Donald Trump's statement, Mr. Rahul termed his dead economy remark as a fact. He openly said, Mr. Trump has stated a fact that everyone knows except the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister. But viewers, where is Rahul Gandhi now when the largest ever trade delegation from UK is embracing India for business opportunities?
One of the only people I've seen recently celebrate a visit from Keir Starmer, so he'll be pleased with that. The gripe from the host there was that Rahul Gandhi, so he's the leader of the Indian opposition, had agreed or had suggested that Trump was correct when he posted in July this. He said, "I don't care what India does with Russia. They can take their dead economies down together for all I care." Trump, of course, hasn't been friendly to India since beginning his second term. And since August, the country has faced a massive 50% tariff from the United States on its exports, as ostensibly as punishment for importing Russian oil. And to discuss how India is weathering the Trump tariffs and whether it really is a dead economy, I spoke earlier to Arjun Ramani, who recently left The Economist magazine after working there for 3 years covering India. And he's now doing a PhD at MIT. I began by asking him about the significance of Starmer's trip.
The main thing the trip signals is a commitment from the British side to actually enforce and put into practice the free trade agreement that was signed over the summer and sort of build on that for continued economic integration. And, this signing trade deals has been part of India's sort of manufacturing export strategy for the last several years, right? They've had this massive public infrastructure push, building roads, railways, airports, etc. The goal of that was to reduce logistics costs within the country to make Indian manufacturing exports more competitive. But you don't see a big surge in manufacturing exports. And everyone's like, what's the next bottleneck? Well, one of the other bottlenecks is for a lot of these exports, India doesn't have free trade agreements in place with its major trading partners that other countries, like, for example, Bangladesh or Vietnam do. So, and this will provide market access to a lot of those sectors that are important, like, for example, labor-intensive manufacturing sectors like textiles. So I think it is, important in that respect. I think it also suggests that despite America's retreat from the international trading order, you're still seeing like allies like the UK and sort of non-aligned powers like India, they're continuing to go along, right? Even if you don't have a functional World Trade Organization, you can still strengthen ties bilaterally. I think that will continue to happen. So yeah, I think it's a good news story for India.
You were saying that India's strategy had been to invest lots in infrastructure and logistics to try and boost an export economy. That must mean that Donald Trump's 50% tariffs for Indian exports came as a real blow to the Indian economy. Is that the case? Can you talk about that?
That's exactly right. I think I've seen estimates, various people project if they actually stay in place, you could see, a point shaved off of India's annual growth rate, which is very, very big for like a single macro shock. That said, a big mitigating factor is number one, most of India's exports to the U.S. are services, which are tech services. There's another threat to that, which we could talk about later, which is AI. But I think the tariffs don't directly impact that. And secondly, I was in India for a week a few weeks ago, actually meeting with a lot of people in Delhi, including chief economic advisor, various officials in government, and I think they believe themselves, at least. I hope, when they say they don't think that number, the 50% number, will be the number in 6 months. They realize that the economic consequences of no deal are very high, and Trump wants a deal too. So I think there's intent on both sides. I mean, basically what happened, the reason there was a breakdown in negotiations was it was very personality driven, right? There was the bombing by terrorists, probably coming from Pakistan in Kashmir a few months ago. A ceasefire was brokered. Trump claimed credit for it. Pakistan was willing to give him that credit. India wasn't, for good reason, because I think there was some diplomatic brokering coming from JD Vance and Marco Rubio, but it wasn't that substantial. So India didn't think it. It's sort of also an insult to India that, hey, you have this country that's effectively a military dictatorship in Pakistan. India is a much, much larger economy. Why should we be put on the same playing field? It was sort of an insult to Indian pride. So I think it's possible to get past that. Now you're going to see higher tariff levels for everyone, right? So all U.S. trading partners are going to have a worse time. And unlike the UK or the EU, India does want to maintain sort of this strategic neutrality, non-alignment. That's a policy that, despite the growing ties with the West over the past 20 years, I think this event has sort of just reinforced to Indian elites that, yes, we are neutral. There's a reason why we've maintained this type of non-alignment. And so I think that message has been reinforced among Indian elites.
And as well as sort of imposing these sanctions on India, Donald Trump has called India a dead economy. That's how he dismissed the Indian economy sort of when Modi was meeting with Putin. I've seen from the Indian media that has caused some controversy because the opposition leader, Rahul Gandhi, agreed with Donald Trump and said, yes, India is a dead economy. And now there are people on the Modi side sort of saying that he's being very unpatriotic. But I suppose from an objective standpoint, does it make sense to call India a dead economy?
No, I think that's kind of absurd. India is a developing country, $3,000 GDP per capita, maybe slightly less, 7.5 K per person, just for purchasing power. So yes, it's a poor country. It doesn't have major exports that are backed by intellectual property in any key strategic sectors. It exports a lot of refined oil. It exports a lot of agricultural products. It exports a lot of tech services that are replaceable. So yes, it doesn't have a lot of bargaining power in the global stage yet, but it's growing at 6 to 8% a year. There's a lot of debate over those numbers. I think they probably are at least 6%. You can't trust the quarterly numbers, and we can talk about that. Pramit Bhattacharya has a very good book coming out actually on this, on measuring the informal economy in India. And you basically can't trust the quarterly numbers because a lot of the informal sector is imputed from the formal sector, and you don't get sort of the rebasing unless you have surveys of the informal sector. We're going to get a new one this year, so I think there will be a lot more clarity at the end of 2026 on what the actual growth figures are in India. But if you look at the growth in exports, which we measure really, really well, right? Like it's really hard to fudge with export figures. You're seeing high single digit, double digit growth across a lot of categories. I think India is definitely growing at least 6% a year. I think it's very not true that it's a dead economy. It's growing more than double the rest of the world, right? Without data centers, the US is at, 0.1%, 0.5%. China is probably growing at 2 to 3%, some very low number. And so, yeah, I don't really know where that comes from. I think it's just a sort of, maybe it's a statement probably around the fact that India doesn't have like a key strategic position in the global economy. Yeah, I mean, I think, Rahul Gandhi has to say that. We actually met with him on the last trip over the summer. I think he's very well-read, curious person, engages a lot of people openly, but I sort of disagree with his assessment on the economy. He has to say that though, right? He's the opposition leader.
I suppose people watching might be thinking, oh, who cares about these numbers? It doesn't really matter. But I mean, 1.4 billion people live in India. And I think in my mind, whether or not India can become a middle income or even a rich country in the 21st century is sort of one of the biggest questions around, if what you care about is sort of human flourishing. So, I mean, is India a good news story when it comes to development still? I mean, obviously lots of concerns about Modi politically, but sort of how do you view the next few decades? That's a very big question, but when it comes to sort of Indian development and growth.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it's a hard one. I would say broadly, the development story in India, you have to say is a positive, right? It has so many countries don't give you consistent 6 to 7%. And India has basically since the reforms in 1991. That's remarkable. Extreme poverty has plummeted. Infant mortality has plummeted, and it's continuing to do so. I spent some time in some of the poorest parts of Bihar last summer, and there's a lot of dire poverty, but there's actually not very much starvation. There is, working infrastructure. People have basic, running water and things like that. So I think that's definitely something to be celebrated. The long-term outlook, it partly does depend on this trading situation, right? Because if you're, how have all the countries who've gotten rich in the latter part of the 20th century, they did so through export-led growth, because your domestic economy is too poor to rely on local demand. So, if the rest of the world is closing off, that does mean, India is not going to grow at 8, 9, 10%. It's going to be several percentage points lower per year than the Asian tigers. But the flip side of that is, and I think there's been some energy in this direction, is when the external environment gets weaker, that acts as sort of a push to get your domestic, structural reforms in order. And there's been a lot of conversation about the last few months, basically since the tensions with the U.S. have worsened and the trade situation has worsened. You've seen the GST, the national consumption tax. It's been simplified. At 4 rates with many exceptions, and that's been simplified to kind of 2 major levels, and a lot of these kind of national rules and regulations have been struck. One actually announcement that is sort of very undercovered, but interesting, is if you look at the city of Bangalore, which I think is very critical to India's future growth, and is one of the worst governed cities given its economic clout that you could imagine. Basically, it's no one knows who the mayor or municipal corporation chairman of Bangalore is. It's effectively run by the state government, but they've now created this governing board for the city. The chief minister of the state is explicitly in charge of that board, and it has these sort of 5 sub-governing agencies for different parts of the city. And it's not the first best solution, but it's like an explicit governance structure with clear accountability. My hope is this will, make the Bangalore metro be built a bit faster. But I think city governance is going to be critical for India's growth over the next 20, 30 years. That's where the service sector is going to grow from. And in a lot of in emerging market big cities, you're getting diseconomies of agglomeration, right? Where you get these so much congestion that the benefits you normally get from cities are sort of canceled out. And anytime I see energy towards improving city governance, I feel more optimistic about the long term. But yeah, India is not going to be an Asian tiger. It's not going to grow at 8, 9, 10%. But if it keeps what it's doing right now up, that's pretty significant.
Let's talk about AI. You mentioned that earlier. We talk about AI quite a lot on this show, but I don't think we've covered the angle you're talking about here. So as far as I understand, the way that AI could damage India's export model is lots of the things that India exports are tech services. And those tech services are often, fairly low down the value chain, and they're the kind of things that could be automated. So if you're an American company, instead of outsourcing your labor to India, you get an AI model, an AI bot to do it. I suppose there's a second question though with AI, which is that we're often talking about this AI race between the United States and China, both of them trying to sort of be at the forefront of this industry. I imagine that even though India has a big tech sector, it probably can't compete with China and America when it comes to buying very expensive GPUs. So yeah, talk to me about how sort of AI intersects with India's development model.
AI does sort of pose a threat to the India growth story as well. So on AI companies as well, the government's put a lot of money buying GPUs, trying to kind of get a sovereign AI champion. You do see there might be a partnership between Anthropic and Ambani, the one of the largest kind of titans in India. But in general, there are two internets in the world. I like to say there's sort of the U.S. internet, the Chinese internet, and really everything else is part of the U.S. internet. There's some Southeast Asian countries that use some Chinese tech company apps, but India's internet is very, very integrated with the U.S. And so you see all the top enterprise SaaS companies, social media, AI, cloud, et cetera. They're all U.S. companies. Tech knows no borders. I think the same will be true for AI. Just the fixed capex costs are too high for India to compete. I do think there's some interesting stuff at the application layer, though, that hopefully, the sort of Bangalore scene can take advantage of. The other way that India, actually could pose a negative impact on, or the other way AI could pose a negative impact on India, though, is through exports. If you think about the types of jobs that AI is good at automating, they're sort of modularized. They don't require a lot of in-person context. Ideally, purely on your computer, highly verifiable outputs. It's very good at writing code. That sounds a lot like India's biggest export, which is tech services. And I think that is a potential macroeconomic risk to growth. You already saw this year, TCS, Tata Consultancy Services, the biggest IT company in India, announced 3% reduction in their workforce. I think that's raised fears that this is already happening. I would caution from drawing too many conclusions yet, because there's been a global reduction in spend on software purely for business cycle reasons, like interest rates are high. People overhired and overspent in 2022, 2021 after COVID. But it is possible that AI, at least in terms of setting expectations, is shaping firms' investments. If you think that AGI is coming and you can do all this stuff in-house, why would you, build new contracting relationships with Indian IT companies? The one I'll just leave with one, maybe a slightly more optimistic note, though it is very uncertain, which is something curious happened in China from 1980s to the 2010s, and you really see it culminate with companies like BYD and NIO and Xiaomi today, which is you got a lot of manufacturing FDI. You learned from foreign companies how to make things, and you took that process knowledge and you start developing your own IP eventually. And a lot of the same people are involved in this. And you saw that happen. The Tesla supply chain in China led to a lot of learning that allowed for BYD to be created. Something similar could be happening in the tech services tech sector in India, where you see all these American companies, like Microsoft, Amazon, et cetera, build these massive offices in India. Previously, they were doing mostly back office work. Increasingly, they're doing front office work. You see patenting activity go up. You see hiring go up. I have some active research documenting this. And that stuff is more resistant to automation, right? It's more complex, higher skilled work. 20% of the world's chip designers are in India, which is a little known fact, right? And at some point, these people starting companies, right? So Flipkart, one of India's biggest startup exits, was formed by people who used to work for the Amazon office in India. And I think you're going to see more and more of that. It's sort of a race. Can you kind of move up the kind of ladder of complexity to things that are sort of resistant to automation faster than automation comes for you? Something I'll be watching.